Over my years as a gardener, I've tried a number of different gardening methods and techniques, and I have found that there are some that just don't work for me. And we received a number of comments and questions and suggestions about why don't we try this, why don't we do that. And one of those is Back to Eden gardening. And in this video I'm going to explain to you why I no longer do the Back to Eden gardening method and how we prep our beds here. Some people feel that there are certain methods, techniques, and applications that they feel that everyone should have. Just because it works for them and their context and what they believe in, they feel that it must be done across the board. However, through my experience and through talking with a number of lead gardeners and farmers, that there's not one thing that just works for everybody. Some techniques and some methods work in some cases, in some contexts, and they don't work in others. And I've tried things such as raised beds and no-till methods and Back to Eden gardening with wood chips, and just found that, especially for what I'm doing in the market garden, that those methods and techniques, some of them don't work for me. And one of them is Back to Eden, the Back to Eden gardening. I believe that there is a time and place to use wood chips, and they can be very effective, and that plants in general need some type of covering. However, there are some downfalls, there are some negatives that come with the Back to Eden method, especially from a market gardening standpoint. One is, not all wood chips are created equal. Most of the time when you receive wood chips, you receive a blend of multiple things, because most of the time they're delivering it as mulch. So you're going to get bark in there, you're going to get wood chunks, and those are not ideal for the Back to Eden method. Overall, you want finer chips, and then you want those chips to age, which is a negative, a major negative for a market gardener, because that means you're going to have to wait. Because that's time, and if you lose time, that's going to be money that you're not going to make in your market garden. However, I do like wood chips, fresh wood chips, for areas around the farm where you're going to be using it around your trees, your fruit trees, and for your animals and areas that they're going to be in, but I don't like it in the market garden. The second reason why I don't do the Back to Eden method in my market garden is if you have poor soil quality, adding the wood chips on top of poor soil, it's just going to still be poor soil for a long time. So the soil will eventually improve, but that's just going to be even longer that you're going to have to wait to improve the fertility of your soil. So if you're not using wood chips, which we're not, and you're starting with poor soil, which we have, you can improve the fertility of your soil quicker without using wood chips. The third reason why I don't use the Back to Eden method is for germination purposes. Trying to get your seedlings to germinate and start in wood chips is very difficult. And as a market gardener, you want to be able to start things efficiently and start them when you want them to start. So with low germination rate, that is a big negative for market gardeners. And as a market gardener, if you're growing things like radishes and carrots, you really need those to germinate. They're not going to work to be transplanted into wood chips. And the last reason why I don't use the Back to Eden method in our garden is because of a nitrogen tie-up. Yes, the wood chips, especially if they get in your soil, can tie up the nitrogen and rob your plants from receiving the nitrogen that they need to grow. Yes, that is just a limited time thing that you're dealing with there with that nitrogen tie-up. However, that's going to be time that you lose of growing your plants and being able to grow more in your market garden. Eventually, that nitrogen will come back and you'll be able to use it. But once again, that's time you're going to have to wait for that nitrogen to become available. So overall, if you're looking to do a market garden, you may want to think twice about using the Back to Eden method in your garden, because it can cause you to lose out in time, which is going to cause you to lose out in money, as well as losing out on maybe not producing as much on your farm. With all that said, there are certain things that I do like about the Back to Eden method. I do like the principle of covering your crops, and one application that I do like is using grass clippings or leaves, especially on your plants such as tomatoes and peppers, some of your longer growing plants that are going to sit there and they're going to need some of that moisture to stay in there. I really do like it for that. So now you may be asking, what do you actually do in your garden? How do you garden here on your farm? Well, I use a lot of the principles that I have learned from urban farmer Curtis Stone and J.M. Fortier and Ray Tyler at Rose Creek Farm. And what we do here is we do a low-till methods here on our farm with high rotation. It is a market garden, so we are looking to rotate our crops and grow crops that are shorter days to maturity, so that way we can maximize the things that we're growing and produce. To start, our beds are a standard 30 inches wide, and we do that for a number of reasons. One is because it's easy to manage and easy to harvest beds that are 30 inches wide. And if you're 5'5" and under, you may want to do beds that are 24 inches wide. But for most people, a 30-inch bed works great because you can reach across from either side to harvest or do some of the things that you may need to do to manage that bed. You can also straddle the bed and get to where you need to quickly and efficiently. Another benefit to a 30-inch bed is you use less land and you can produce more. In a lot of commercial farms, the beds are set up for tractors, and with that you're going to have bigger walkways and more walkways just for that tractor to be able to go through. So with a 30-inch bed, you can actually maximize the space that you're growing things in. And another reason for a 30-inch bed is you're going to be using less materials, and you can actually use cheaper materials without having to buy huge big tractors to operate your farm on. And a lot of the tools for market gardening are set up for 24 inches and 30-inch beds. So to start off, first thing you really want to do when you're prepping an area for a garden is you want to get a soil test, just to know kind of where you are and what you're working with your soil, to know what direction you need to go to improve the soil, just so you just kind of have a starting point. And we've done a lot of things after we got our soil test to really improve the soil, such as adding chicken manure, cow manure, duck manure, as well as bringing in juice pulp and compost in. However, we found that we still were lacking in areas such as potassium and phosphorus, and those are really important for growing roots on your crops. So we were having a lot of difficulties growing our root crops. So we really have been working and continue to work on improving the phosphorus and potassium in our garden. So just an FYI for those of you who may be trying to grow things such as radish and you're just getting the green and your root's not growing, you may want to consider adding more phosphorus or potassium. You may be lacking in some area of fertility in your soil. Alright, and here is the actual method or the system that I have in place, at least for now, the steps that we have for prepping our bed. I typically use a walk-behind tractor or a rototiller to break new ground and set up and shape my beds for the first initial time. After that, I begin laying out my beds by starting with marking my first corner, and then I measure 30 inches from there to get the width of the first bed. From there, I'll roll out my line, and then I will mark and measure 12 inches from that line to get the width of my walkway. And you can use a machine or some type of equipment to dig out the trench for your walkway if you're doing raised beds. But since we are low tech, I just shovel it out by hand. And then from there, I repeat this process for each bed that I intend to make. After this, my typical normal bed prep is this. First thing I do is I bring in the broad fork to loosen up and aerate the soil, and I really love the broad fork, and I think it is a must-have tool for any market garden. Then the second thing I like to do is bring in compost and fresh organic matter to your soil. And at this point, I would also bring in any fertilizer that you may need, and I'm not going to say a specific fertilizer because it's based on the soil test you're doing on what you're going to need on your farm. And at this point is where you can bring in a Tilthor or mini cultivator to blend in the top few inches of the compost and the fertilizer that you added and some of that soil that you use with the broad fork. And for those of you who are into no-till, if you are into no-till at this point and you want to do away with the tiller or the Tilthor, you could just add more compost to have some loose soil, because you're going to need some loose soil to put your plants in. And I do want to mention that this can be a cost, some upfront costs can be a little bit bigger up front if you're trying to do no-till at first. It may cause you to have to bring in a lot more compost to do that. But it can be done. However, like I said, it may be more costly to do it up front. But over time, you're going to get to where you have to do less and less tillage as you are building your soil and adding more organic matter. And that is the path that we are on. We're trying to do less tillage. We're doing low till. I'm not necessarily doing no till, but doing less tillage. And then the last part, you actually got to put some seed or plants in there. We actually go ahead and we either seed or transplant our plants into our beds at this point. And in the case of our lettuces, we go ahead and transplant our lettuces into landscape fabric. And we do this because we have a lot of weed pressure that we're working to really reduce, and having that landscape fabric is really, really, really essential for keeping the weeds out of our lettuce. I do want to mention that for those of you who are planning to do no-till and you haven't set up your areas yet, I would recommend that you at least consider doing tilling to begin with, because that is going to help you to initially set up your beds and be able to move the soil that you need to move to shape your beds and to place them where you want to place them. Especially if you're doing areas that are slope surfaces like we are, where you're having to move a lot of soil to terrace your land to get the beds shaped the way you want them. Trying to do that without tilling is going to cost you a lot of time, a lot of energy, and could cost you some money as well. Well, that's it. There you have it. Just a little more insight on how I operate my garden here and why I don't do Back to Eden in my market garden, and how we actually prep our beds here on the farm. That's it for now. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and we'll see you next time. Grow on.